Sales forecasting now then, quite a big chunky section. So first of all, what is sales forecasting? Well, it's making an estimate of the volume or value of a firm's sales in the future. And why would you want to do that? Well, it affects lots of different parts of business. So your purchasing department, because they have to think about the supplies that you need. Maybe your planning department, they're going to want to think about the profitability of the business. I suppose a product life cycle is a sort of way of a very rough estimate of sales forecasting, isn't it? And you might want to change your marketing activities based on what you forecast. You know, if your product's going into, maturity, you might think, do we need all of this advertising budget spent on it because it's not a new product? If it's going into decline, you might want to think about extension strategies. You are going to have to think about the HR aspect of it, so your staffing, the space as well, just basic operations features, how much space you need, and how much stock, how much output you need to produce as well, so that you can meet the level of demand, and whether maybe you should switch production to something else because demand's falling. So a few different methods now. Here, firstly, is a quantitative method, so extrapolation. So you identify underlying trends in past data or back data, and you project this trend forward. Okay, and you sometimes use a moving average to work this out. So a moving average just smooths out the data. So here we have some data for some sales, something I've just made up, and we can probably see a bit of a trend there, but what you want to do is just smooth out some of the data so that we can see a general trend. And so how you do a moving average, you've got to have three figures, so you can't do it for January there, but you add up the three figures and then you divide it by 3 because it's a 3-month moving average that we're doing here, so it comes to 12. And then I've done it for the next one. I've not done it for all of them because they're quite easy to do. And then sorry about that. So you just keep on creating your moving average going down here. And what it should do is it should smooth. That's the next slide. It should smooth out your data. So whereas before it was a little bit volatile, here we have a much smoother. And what we can do is say, well, we could draw a line of best fit and then we could extrapolate it forward, couldn't we? And then make estimates of what the data should be. Sometimes, I mean, they've never done this on a past paper before, but what you could work out is the variation. So here's the 3-month moving average and here's what it actually was. So it actually varied by 1. Here it didn't vary at all. And what you could do at the end is add them all up, divide by 12 because there's 12 months there, and work out the average variation from the 3-month moving average. And then when you're doing your sort of line of best fit or trend, you could, whether it comes out as a positive or a negative, you could add that number to your moving average or your line of best fit, and you get sometimes a more accurate figure. What you can do as well, you can look at seasonal variation. So sometimes they do it in kind of quarters, and so if I had another March here, I could add, say the variation was 1 plus 1 here and it was plus 2 for the other one, that would come to 3. If I divided it by 2, because I've got 2 months, March this year and March for the other year that I'm looking at, that would come to 1.5. So you could say that in March it usually differs from the line of best fit by 1.5. So that sometimes gets you a more accurate figure. So that is technically what cyclical or seasonal variation is and how to work it out. And then you plus or minus it from your line of best fit if indeed it's asking you to do that. But it's not asked that on a question before, but that's, in case you needed to work it out. Correlation is looking for cause and effect, really. It's looking for something that's caused something else. Correlation just means that there seems to be a link between the two. So if A happens, B happens, but it doesn't mean necessarily that A caused B to happen. So sometimes you might get, this is a positive relationship here. So we might find that sales increase when the temperature increases. So we could think about something like ice creams. That would be reasonable to think that ice cream sales would increase when the temperature increases. And then we could say, well, if we can tell when the temperature is going to increase, then we need to think that we're going to have more sales, and then we need to plan for that. So that would be a way of using correlation. But the problem with using correlation is that it's not always causation. So I always use this example with my students. You probably don't want to write this one in the exam, but I always say that in towns with more churches, there are more prostitutes, and that is a fact. And I say, what's that about? And my students come up with all kinds of reasons, but it's just correlation. It's because in towns with more churches, they just tend to be bigger towns. So yeah, they're going to have more prostitutes in those bigger towns. It doesn't mean that more churches causes more prostitution. So there's correlation, but there's not causation between the two. And if you've watched Freakonomics, the DVD, or even better, read the book, I think there's a section in there about how sometimes back when polio, the horrible disease, childhood disease, wasn't really understood very well, people used to think it was or some people thought it was correlated to ice cream, or it's caused by eating ice cream, because there was a correlation between times when people would eat ice cream and polio cases would increase, but it's not at all connected to that. So you do have to be a little bit careful that there's a causation relationship, not just correlation, because you do often get correlation. But this is a positive relationship. If it was sloping downwards, it would be a negative relationship, still a relationship, but just as the numbers along the bottom got bigger, sales would have decreased. So we'd expect to see a negative relationship with something like boots or winter coats, wouldn't we, with the temperature along the bottom. And then if there was it was like a scatter graph, there was just nothing, no trend, then you would say that there's no correlation between the two. Market research can also be used to maybe estimate sales, and some of I'm sure you've got lots of knowledge from the AS course on this. So if you want to go back to the AS course in detail, have a look at the market research video for Unit 1. But it's good for new products where you can't extrapolate because you've got no back data. And you can also gather a little bit of feedback as well and strengthen your marketing mix, maybe change your marketing mix based on that data. But as with all market research, you've got to think, is it reliable and is it valid? So making it reliable, the data reliable, depends on very sophisticated methods of collection, so that you don't have biased questions or questions that make a particular answer more likely, and you might need to pay kind of professionals to do this and collect it for you. And also, is the data valid? Are you asking the right questions to be able to make reasonable forecasts? So this video here, if I just click on this and we'll see if it comes up. I hope it's what I thought it was. It's a bit of a mystery when it's coming up like that. Yes, so it's the launch of New Coke back in 1985 when I was born, and there's loads of videos on this on the YouTube on YouTube. Oh my gosh, I'm showing my age. But this basically, Coke been around for ages, and they have a very old recipe, but Pepsi started to gain lots of sales in the 80s, and they were really kind of gaining on Coca-Cola. Pepsi's another old company as well, but they just weren't as popular as Coca-Cola. But they did this thing called the blind taste test, and people would say that they preferred Coke, but actually when they did blind taste test, lots of people preferred Pepsi. So Coke were like, oh my gosh, people are preferring Pepsi, not our product. So they decided they wanted to make their product a little bit more like Pepsi, and they made it they changed the taste a little bit and made it taste a little bit sweeter. And this was a bit of a disaster, really, because people didn't like them messing with the recipe of Coke, because it sort of was tied up in America's identity, because it's this old brand, heritage, all that kind of stuff. And people were, protesting and things like that, as you can see. And if you watch the video, or any of the videos on it, you'll see exactly what happened, but it actually got people to switch back to Coke Original, as they called it. And some people have said, well, it was either a really stupid idea or an incredibly clever idea, because they actually got their customers to come back and from Pepsi in the first place. But it just goes to show how market research doesn't always give you the right answers, because what they did was they asked people whether they'd like this new sweeter Coke, and lots of people said yes. But what they didn't ask was, would you like this? And would you like to see the old Coke just disappear? So it would be new Coke from now on. And people didn't like that idea. They thought, well, it's nice as an alternative, but we don't really, want that as, to happen, to get rid of the old one. So that can be a problem of market research. Test marketing, this is a new section. This hasn't been examined before, so I'd revise your notes on this. But it's an experiment conducted in a test market, a field laboratory. So it's actual stores, real life buying situations, so a little bit more reliable and valid than market research. And buyers don't know they're participating in an evaluation exercise. And so they release the product in a smaller market or a few stores, and they see how it goes. And JML do this a lot. They're really into their test marketing. So they'll release some of their products in a few stores just to see how they sell. And the ped egg, I think, was particularly popular, and so they released it nationwide. So it can be more accurate than market research. The company can plan for stock and adjust the marketing based on any feedback that they get. There was actually, my students read an article on this, and there was a funny example of a fountain pen that they'd sold that was really, really strong, and it sold, okay-ish. But then customers really responded well to a video of the fountain pen being shot through a soda can, a can of pop or something, and they were saying, well, no one would actually ever want to do this, but it was a really an image that stuck with the customer and made them more likely to buy the pen, even though no one had ever want to do that. So you can tinker with the marketing mix a little bit, make it more successful. However, sampling errors can occur because you're only using a small sample. The full marketing mix is not going to be available, so you can't do your above the line promotion with this. And it can be more expensive and time consuming, and it can mean competitors can see your products and maybe come out with alternatives before you've done a nationwide release. Brainstorming, these are the more qualitative approaches to sales forecasting, so problem solving in a group environment, so we can see some brainstorming going on there. And the Delphi technique, which is similar, if you just Google or YouTube the Delphi technique is similar to brainstorming, but you get an expert that comes up with some ideas of what might happen in the future and predict what might happen. Then they write them down, they send it, or they come up with kind of options, they send it out to other experts, the other experts comment on them, it comes back, it goes back to the other experts, they can see what everybody else has written, it goes back and they refine it, and they go through this process and refine it. Now the key difference between the Delphi technique and brainstorming is you're looking for kind of you're always using experts. You might be using experts here, but the Delphi technique, you're very much using experts, but they don't meet face to face. So what they found is that people are a bit more open-minded when they're not meeting face to face, and they're not making judgments, and no one can kind of overpower the conversation and lead it in a certain direction or anything like that. So it's actually been, or I've never used it before, but businesses that have used it before swear by it and say it's very successful and very good at kind of predicting the future. And then intuition, so you might get this for people that are very, very experienced business leaders, and they're saying, I've just got a feeling about this one. And I don't know, I don't think it's a feeling in your guts, but what I think it is, it's just experience and something subconsciously telling you what you should do, but you might not understand it or be able to process it in rational or express it in a rational way. Now, limitations, I've talked verbally about some of the limitations, but one of the biggest limitations I think of extrapolation and back data is that it's a little bit like trying to drive your car while looking out the back window. You know, you're looking at what's happened in the past to be able to guess what's going to happen in the future, and that's not always a very good approach. And obviously you've got that problem with correlation. You know, is it causation or just correlation? And then you've got, you know, people might overpower you in brainstorming. That's why you have the Delphi technique, but it's more used on qualitative factors. You're not going to be able to come up with a quantitative number. Okay, we forecast it's going to be 2,000 sales or something like that. And intuition is obviously, you know, just, I guess, I suppose. So that's one of the problems. And we've spoken about the problems of market research and test marketing as well. So big section there, but good luck.